Greetings once again, BEC111 students. We are continuing with chapter 5, in which we are basically looking at corporate social responsibility. There are many definitions of what corporate social responsibility is. People have different views. So for that reason, I will take directly from your textbook on page 148, where it reads, definitions of corporate social responsibility vary by virtue of, among other things, the different practical orientations of corporations towards their responsibilities. Different companies also give varying emphasis to different aspects of corporate social responsibility. For example, community involvement, socially responsible products and processes, and socially responsible employee relations. They do this to realize their business objectives. The general consensus is that corporate social responsibility is an umbrella concept that recognizes certain factors that we will soon be looking at. So by the end of this chapter, you should at least be able to define what corporate social responsibility is, to explain why a company should consider corporate social responsibility programs. You should also be in a position to define corporate governance and explain corporate governance compliance requirements. Also to understand who the stakeholders of a company are and give reasons why a company should engage with its stakeholders. Like when a company wants to give back to the community, when they want to contribute to the common good of the society, why is it necessary for them to engage with the stakeholders before they just dump whatever they think is needed in the society without engaging with them? Also, you should be able to describe how a company would go about engaging with its stakeholders, like the stakeholder engagement process, as well as the principles of engagement. You should also be in a position to define the concept of sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Some speak of the triple bottom line, some speak of the 3 Ps, some speak of the issue of using resources wisely so that we will not deplete them. We should also be in a position to describe the contribution of CSR to sustainable development. This is the chapter outline that we will follow. Basically, introduction to corporate social responsibility, corporate governance, stakeholder engagement, sustainable development, and that will be the end of the chapter. As I had said, there are debates as to what exactly CSR is, and there are different views from different organizations. However, there's general consensus that corporate social responsibility includes these particular factors that we have on this slide. That companies have a responsibility for their impact on society and the natural environment. Companies must be held responsible for their impact on the society as well as on the natural environment. Companies also have a responsibility for the behavior of others with whom they do business with. For example, their suppliers, their customers, if they cause any harm to the environment or to the society, those companies are also responsible. Companies also need to manage their relationship with the wider society. So basically, there's general consensus that these aspects actually are corporate social responsibility. There are also other terms that are important for us to understand, which are basically corporate citizenship and corporate social investment. Corporate citizenship recognizes corporations or organizations as legal persons with certain rights and responsibilities. So we have natural citizens, people with flesh and blood, people who are natural beings. They have their rights, they have responsibilities. So we are also saying those corporate citizens, those businesses that are regarded by law as separate legal persons, they should also have their responsibilities as well as their rights. So basically that's corporate citizenship, where we are saying those organizations, they must also understand that they have, in as much as they have rights to operate as separate legal persons, they also have responsibilities, or there are also responsibilities that come with it. Then there is also what is known as corporate social investment. This is also part of corporate social responsibility, and it includes the contribution that is made to society, excluding contributions made through the core business activities. So, for instance, a company may say they contribute a certain percentage of their profit to maybe sporting activities or to charity. That particular commitment can actually be seen as corporate social investment if it is not part of the core business activities of that particular organization. In the Northern Hemisphere, this is also known as corporate philanthropy, like charity work by business organizations. Corporate social responsibility in contemporary business management. What is important on this particular slide is to understand that corporate social responsibility is mainly driven by certain drivers. There are drivers, there are reasons, something that pushes companies to practice corporate social responsibility. And these drivers are very, very important for purposes of this course. You will see them on page 156 of your textbook. It starts actually on page 155 of your textbook, where we have social drivers, government drivers, market drivers, as well as ethical drivers. So with social drivers, basically, organizations engage in corporate social responsibility activities because they want to create a reputation that will make them socially appealing to people in society. Because if people have a negative attitude or a negative perception towards your organization, they may not want to do business with it, they may not want to be associated with it. They may actually push themselves away from your organization. So, to appear as if you are socially responsible, to appear as if you have to also gain a good reputation and goodwill in society, organizations engage in corporate social responsibility activities. They give back to society, they plow back to the community, and they also try by all means not to harm the environment, or they take responsibility for the damage that they cause on the environment, so that they can relate with people. There are also government drivers, organizations engaging in corporate social responsibility because the government requires them to do so. There are actually laws that stipulate or that state that companies should take responsibility for their own actions. So for that reason, you may see that companies, they may actually engage in corporate social responsibility for tax purposes, so that they benefit from tax incentives, and also so that they operate in line with the laws of the government. There are also market drivers, whereby they actually companies actually engage in corporate social responsibility activities so as to gain revenue or as to reduce costs. That is actually on page 156 of your textbook, where market drivers are explained and why companies engage in these. Part of which is that they want to avoid fines. They want to avoid fines. They also want to avoid legal costs that may come with not engaging in corporate social responsibilities, in corporate social responsibility activities. They also want to use resources efficiently. The also reducing recruitment costs for staff retention and reducing the cost of capital. So if you look at this, you actually see that corporate social responsibility activities can be engaged in for the mere fact that companies want to reduce costs. However, you must also know that market drivers also include the intention of organizations to increase revenue on their part, which is an advantage to organizations. So you may actually see that the companies can engage in corporate social responsibility activities to avoid boycotts, people boycotting from their products. So if they engage, people will buy and use their products and services. That way, they will have more sales and more revenue. They may also do it to access certain markets, to have access to markets which they would not have access to if they had not given back to the community, if they had not interacted with the community. So there are also reasons why organizations would actually pursue those market drivers. Then ethical drivers, these relate to doing things that are generally acceptable in society. So once you do something that is unethical, some people may avoid you, they may avoid working with you, they may avoid doing business with you. So to appear as ethical, organizations also engage in corporate social responsibility activities. Ethical drivers are also clearly explained on page 156 of your textbook. Moving on to corporate governance. Governance basically refers to the way in which a business makes its decision and how the affairs of that particular business are actually managed. So corporate governance is the system by which companies or organizations are managed and controlled. Who has authority to do ABC? Who controls what? So that's corporate governance. So roles and responsibilities of both within a company in terms of good governance. There are roles of executive directors. There are also roles of non-executive directors. Like, what is it that non-executive directors can do which cannot be done by executive directors? What is it that executive directors can do which cannot be done by non-executive directors? What are the differences anyway between these two? So mainly, the main difference between non-executive directors and executive directors is that executive directors are normally full-time employees of the organization, and they are involved in the day-to-day operations of the organization. So there are certain decisions that they can make. However, there are also other decisions that they cannot make without the endorsement of other directors who may be non-executive directors. Then there are also primary principles of good governance. The primary principles of good governance, I know sometimes we take this for granted and we assume that it is very clear. We all understand what this means. But it's important that when you find time, also go and read them in detail. From page 159 to page 160 of the prescribed textbook. These are the principles of good governance. Fairness, treating everyone fairly, responsibility, taking responsibility, social responsibility, discipline, transparency, independence, and accountability. So these are the primary principles of good governance. For purposes of this course, you will need to be able to explain a bit about each and every one of these principles. And to explain them, you can refer to page 159 and page 160 of the prescribed textbook. corporate governance and compliance, there are also lots of codes, lots of guidelines that are used to determine appropriate standard of conduct. And there are also consequences, normally, if you do not comply with what is required. Once you become a manager or a director in an organization and you are involved in the governance of that particular organization or in decision making of that particular organization, if you do not comply to certain rules, to certain guidelines, there usually, or obviously there must be consequences. So it's either you explain or you face more stringent consequences. So there are three ways. Okay, corporate governance also plays a role because they are the ones who make decisions. They are the ones who also determine how an organization or how a company will engage in corporate social responsibility activities. So corporate social responsibility activities find their way through corporate governance. If those who are leading, those who are making decisions in an organization decide not to engage in corporate social responsibility activities, then nothing happens and nothing will move. So it is necessary to realize that corporate social responsibility only finds its way through corporate governance. And there are three ways in which an organization can determine how they will engage with the society, how they will contribute to the common good of society, how they will give back to the society, or how they will plow back to the community. There is what is known as the values-based system. The values-based system, we also have a stakeholder engagement process and also a combination of the values-based system and stakeholder engagement process. I can refer you to page 163 of the prescribed textbook, where the values-based system is described as a process whereby CSR policy or corporate social responsibility policy is aligned with the company's own vision, mission, values, and guiding principles. So it is these values that are then used to determine CSR activities or corporate social responsibility activities. So if they are to engage in corporate social responsibility activities, it will be in line with the values of the organization, with the vision of the organization, with the mission of the organization, with the guidelines of the organization. So they would stick to the values of that particular organization. However, with the stakeholder engagement process, in this case, the directors or the leaders in an organization or the managers in an organization, they will allow stakeholders to determine what they want from the company and what they consider to be issues and culture of the company. What is it that they expect from the company? So instead of just coming up with your own values and you take your own values, you impose them on the community to say, no, if we do A, B, C, we have improved the community. With the stakeholder engagement process, you actually go to the community, you listen to them, what is it that is important to them, then you implement that for their benefit. Remember, they say whatever that is done without us is not for us. Whatever that is done without involving us may actually be against us. So some organizations have come up with good projects. They took them to the communities, but they were not acceptable by the communities simply because people in the communities were not involved in making those decisions. Then the third option is a combination of the value-based and the stakeholder engagement process, which to me seems to be better because in this case, a company is not just doing what they think is good from their side, and they are also not doing what the community just thinks is good from the community side, but they actually listen to the community. Then they also do something that is in line with their values, with their vision, with their mission. Reasons why companies engage in with stakeholders, why it is important for companies to engage with stakeholders. Responsible companies want to understand and respond to society's expectations of a responsible company. You cannot expect to just impose what you think is right on the community. You need to also hear from them. You need to also understand what is it that they consider as important from their own standpoint. Engagement is a means to help build a better relationship with all parties. If you engage with other stakeholders, you tend to understand them, they tend to also understand you. So you can build a working relationship with them. Engagement also helps provide opportunities to align business practices with societal needs and expectations, helping drive long-term sustainability and shareholder value. So you can actually prosper an organization through engagement, because that is where you can also identify opportunities as you engage with other stakeholders. Stakeholders are basically defined as parties that affect or that are affected by the activities of a company or of an organization. We have primary stakeholders as well as secondary stakeholders. With primary stakeholders, there is some contractual financial relationship with the company, whereas with secondary stakeholders, they have less direct impact on the company. Examples of secondary stakeholders are activists, non-governmental organizations, the media, and so forth. But in terms of primary stakeholders, these include shareholders as well as employees, those that have a contractual relationship with the company or with the organization. Engagement is seen as an ongoing, multifaceted process between the corporation and stakeholders. And purposes, basically, they include to provide information, capacity building, listening and responding to one another, including communities and stakeholders in decision-making processes, and also help to develop goodwill and better understanding of objectives and priorities of the company. Engagement will also help to establish realistic understanding of potential outcomes. To avoid situations where the community only expects the organization to do a lot and for free, and the organization also expects the community to just accept the organization as it is. But if you engage, at least you understand one another. There are also different levels of engagement. These you also find them explained in your textbook, but there are factors that influence or that affect the level of engagement. It is these factors that we are explaining or that we included in this particular slide. That the goals through interaction with stakeholders, what are the goals that need to be achieved? Mode of communication, does it allow a deeper engagement? The nature of the relationship between the parties, and also engagement approach that is used with the stakeholders. So that can actually determine the level of engagement. Then also important are the principles of engagement. Because some people, they think, no, it's a process that you can just do haphazardly. But there are 5 key principles of engagement. One being that you should try by all means to encourage and welcome parties from all parties that may have something of value. So involvement, you must try as much as possible to engage everyone. So the first principle is that of involvement, where we are saying encourage broad involvement by welcoming interested parties and respecting their roles. You should also build existing relationships and find new participants to enrich the dialogue. Then the other principle is that you ought to be comprehensive. Engagement ought to be comprehensive. Consider every issue. Discuss every issue. The issues that are also discussed, they ought to be relevant. So focus on issues of greatest importance to the engagement process. Then there must always be learning. You ought to be able to uncover new perspectives and also seek mutual understanding and identify mutually beneficial solutions to the current problems. Then it must not end as engagement. You must actually implement and act on what you have agreed on doing through the stakeholder engagement process. This is the process, stakeholder engagement process. It starts with preparing, whereby you identify stakeholders, also understand each other, identify issues that you ought to discuss, issues that you ought to engage on, and understand them. Then you set objectives. You develop the engagement plan, then engage. That's when you actually meet the objectives that you have set in the very first step. The next step will then be to evaluate, where you assess the outcomes. What you actually set to achieve, what you planned to achieve, did you achieve it? Then finally, you share the information and improvement areas. Sustainable development, that's another aspect that we also ought to look at. Basically, sustainable development is defined as development that meets the need of the future, the needs of the present, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Since resources are limited, we mustn't use them to a point where those that will come after us, they will have nothing to use. So sustainable development also encompasses a number of areas and highlights sustainability as the idea of environmental, economic, and social progress and equity within the limits of the world's natural resources. People who speak of sustainable development also speak of the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps, namely planet, people, and profit. That as an organization, you should still make profits, but whatever you do should benefit people without damaging the planet. So this was it for corporate social responsibility, and I am sure you understood key concepts that you were supposed to understand. You will also read this particular chapter in your textbook. Continue to read it. When you have questions, feel free to contact me directly on my email. You can also contact me via Blackboard. Thank you so much.